Should you be supplementing your diet with collagen? And if you do, will it prevent the ligament and tendon injuries that most of us get from climbing and training? Many of you have been asking me to try and answer these questions in a video, and so that's what I'm going to do. Recently, I've seen qualified dietitians and nutritionists make some pretty bold claims on collagen, such as every climber should be taking it, or just that it's been proven to prevent tendon injuries. So in a moment, I'll take a wee look at some scientific papers and see if either of those statements are evidence-based. I'll tell you at the start of this video that I don't personally supplement collagen, and my view is that there may be a rather better alternative to collagen, and that's where I'm hedging my bets at the moment, although we are going to need a bit more data to be certain of that. I should say that I've been thinking of making more videos on supplements I don't take and why, and so if by the end of this video you judge that it's been useful, I'd appreciate if you would let me know either by pressing the like button or by leaving me a comment, and you can let me know if there's other supplements that you would like to be given the same treatment. Lots of you have already got in touch to ask me to discuss a very expensive multivitamin called Athletic Greens, so possibly that one will be next on the list, unless your comments dictate otherwise. Tendon and ligament injuries, as I'm sure you know, are a huge problem in climbing. I've had plenty of them myself, and for a long time they did dictate my successes and failures in climbing. That's why I called the subtitle of my book, Don't Let Climbing Injuries Dictate Your Success. I was kind of driven by so many injuries to study them deeply for several years and write this book on how to prevent and treat them, and I'll come back to this book later on. So there's tons of other videos explaining in detail that ligaments and tendons are primarily made of collagen, and the bulk of collagen is made from two amino acids, glycine and proline. So I'll not give you a long preamble on collagen and types of collagen and things like that, but I just want to say one thing about collagen structure because I want to talk about those amino acids in detail. Glycine is the smallest of the amino acids, and the small size and shape are probably why evolution chose it to make the twisting helix fibers of collagen. Our bodies contain a lot of glycine and proline since so much of us is composed of connective tissue, bone and tendon and ligament, cartilage, fascia and skin. And this leads to the two fundamental pillars of the argument for why our diets are not giving us enough glycine and proline, and we should supplement collagen on top of this. So let's go through each of them and see that we encounter some problems right away. In a sense, those two amino acids, glycine and proline, bioaccumulate in the collagen of animals, and because we need so much, the argument goes that we need to eat whole animals, the skin, the bones, the tendons and the hair, in order to get their glycine and proline in sufficient amounts. And maybe that sounds a bit unappealing, but remember that is what your collagen supplement is made of. It's ground up cow bones and skin. So hold that thought because we'll come back to that later on. The argument goes that in our hunter-gatherer past, we mainly ate big animals and we would have eaten the whole animal, and therefore, per unit total protein or energy, we would have consumed plenty of glycine and proline. And since glycine is the more abundant of the two amino acids in collagen, and to stop this video from getting too long, I'm going to focus mainly on glycine for the rest of the video. So this argument about eating the whole animal is definitely rational, and it's a truism of the wild that very little of any food source is wasted. However, there are also some problems that I have with this idea. For one thing, the picture changes quite a lot depending on whereabouts in our evolutionary past you actually look. One of the first things that might have started us on our path from moving from ape to human was cracking open bones to access marrow, possibly after the other carnivores had already extracted some of or most of the collagen from the carcass. And this was also before humans were starting to use cooking, which is important to actually digest collagen fibers. Whole uncooked collagen is actually sometimes referred to as animal fibre because a fair bit of it will make it through to the large intestine and it feeds the gut microbiome there. And that's also one of the reasons why dismissing the carnivore diet because it doesn't contain any plant fibre might be a little bit premature. But like most things in paleoanthropology, the estimated time when humans started to use cooking has really changed a lot in the research, and it's still very uncertain. But it seems kind of a stretch, I think, to say that early hominids would have been dependent on cooking to actually get enough glycine in their diet. If we look more recently, the hunter-gatherer populations who eat mainly animals don't appear to eat the whole animal, at least consistently. So here's a clip from the Arctic explorer Vilhjalmur Stephenson, who lived for a few years with the Arctic Inuit and later wrote about their diet in his book called The Fat of the Land.
I have since then spent more than 6 aggregated more than 6 years on red meat. That is seal meat, caribou meat, muskox meat, polar bear, grizzly bear, and so on. You have to have fat with a lean. Lean and fat together make a perfect diet. A balanced diet.
Balanced diet.
Balanced diet. You have everything you need if you have both lean and fat. You don't have to eat any organs. That's a peculiar folklore.
Oh, is that
We
so?
feed the organs mostly to the dogs.
So, having said all that about the uncertainty of paleoanthropology, I still think it's fair to say that modern westernized cultures tend to eat less of the collagenous parts of animals, generally speaking. So overall, this eating the whole animal argument has plausibility, but it's kind of shaky. The other pillar of the argument that's routinely made by folks selling you collagen is that we can't make enough glycine endogenously, that is, in our own body, to meet our needs. If you watch some other videos on this platform or elsewhere, then you'll see people say that we have a high daily turnover of glycine amounting to many tens of grams, but that we can only make about 3 grams of glycine per day. And this is important because glycine is still considered to be a non-essential amino acid because we can actually make it. But if it is in fact conditionally essential, and that 3 gram figure is really correct, then that would be quite a strong argument that we would need to eat more and we should consider supplementing it. So the question is that 3 gram limit actually well established in the literature? And that was one of the first things that I looked at in the literature when looking at whether we should supplement collagen. And unfortunately, the story with regard to both glycine turnover in the body and also how much we can actually make seems to lead back to this one paper. Now, it's a good paper and a really useful paper because it has a stab at trying to work out how much glycine we actually turn over and how much we can make. But ultimately, I'm kind of cautious about relying on it because it's built on many assumptions rather than actual measurements. So there's a really interesting feature of collagen production, which is that the body appears to struggle to get it right first time. And when collagen fibers are produced and they're assembled into that precise architecture of the triple helix, the assembly process apparently actually fails most of the time. And this paper explains this mechanism sometimes fails and a process of fine quality control that we shall call the pro-collagen cycle occurs inside the cell to check the structure. It involves degrading all newly synthesized molecules that are not correctly folded in the triple helix, resynthesizing them, checking their correct triple helix structure and repeating the degradation synthesis cycle until the correct structure is achieved. And so a high fraction, 30 to 90%, depending on the tissue and the age of individuals, of the newly synthesized collagen is degraded in this cycle within minutes of its synthesis. And then they continue, although there is substantial reutilization of glycine in the pro-collagen cycle, this still adds to the amount of glycine required. So later on in the paper, they go on to construct an estimate of the shortfall in glycine created by this pro-collagen cycle. So they go on to say the gross total of 924 grams of collagen turned over every day corresponds to a consumption of 240 grams of glycine if there is no recycling of glycine, a huge amount, far in excess of the approximately 4 grams available from metabolism and the diet after taking into account the 1.5 grams needed for metabolic functions other than the synthesis of collagen and other proteins. Clearly, therefore, much of the glycine produced from collagen breakdown and from the pro-collagen cycle must be recycled, more than 98% if there is to be no deficit at all. It's very unlikely that the proportion can be as high as this, especially as the large increases in collagen production that follow administration of extra amino acids imply that collagen production is affected by the diet. That's a good point. Moreover, the measured value for cysteine reutilization is only 85%. And although the rate for glycine may be higher, there is no reason to suppose it is so much higher. The right-hand column of Table 3 gives the amount of glycine that is needed if 95%, that's just an estimate, of the glycine released in the pro-collagen cycle is recycled. And even a reutilization as high as this implies a substantial glycine deficit. It's clear that even though the true need cannot be estimated with any precision, that's also a good point, it must amount to several grams, and there are no grounds for believing that the supply of glycine is adequate to meet the demand for collagen. Now, maybe I'm a little bit skeptical, but I am kind of nervous about taking these values as hard and fast. I think that there is a reason to suppose that the recycling rate might be higher, which is the evolutionary imperative to optimize recycling of glycine, since the system relies very heavily on it. The unfortunate fact is that we just don't know how much glycine is recycled. But if we look elsewhere in the literature, we can see that there's a bit more to the story on the recycling of procollagen in tendons. This recent paper showed that the recycling of misfolded procollagen is controlled by a process called autophagy. Autophagy is a catabolic process. In general, it's stimulated not by providing nutrients, but by the absence of nutrients. And it tends to occur when cells are relatively starved of nutrients, either because of an extended gap between meals or after exercise. And in the paper, they make two interesting statements. We propose that autophagy acts as a quality control mechanism underlying procollagen 1 correct maturation, thereby contributing to proper extracellular matrix synthesis and mechanical properties of tendon tissue. And they go on to say, it's indeed worth recalling that autophagy is a Janus-phase process with defects or over-induction both being deleterious for cells. This is probably the case in tendon homeostasis and correct collagen maturation, and we believe that autophagy may bridge the lack of knowledge behind the understanding of tendinopathy. I think that's a really interesting statement, and it makes me think that we need to be a little bit careful at thinking that just throwing more glycine at your tendons is all that's needed to make them stronger. And this year, the same team published another interesting paper looking at the circadian pattern of gene expression in tendons, and they show that a hallmark of healthy tendons is not just more growth, but a day-to-night oscillation of collagen expression. And that fits with the statement that we just made, and also the wider picture of how physiological health is regulated with cycles of, wakefulness and sleep, exercise and rest, feeding and fasting, and growth and repair. So is there any takeaway from this research? I think in all honesty, it's probably a bit too early to say, but I just brought it up to point out that I'm cautious that just turning growth mode on as much as possible by throwing lots of nutrients in might not work that well, given that the hallmark of diseased tendons is an impairment of the ability to switch growth off and undergo the quality control of autophagy. But I think there's a lot more research needed to get a firm handle on how this impacts sports nutrition. But I'm just going to go back to the glycine paper for a minute. So they summarise their model of glycine balance in this table, table 4, suggesting that the shortfall that we have amounts to around 10 grams a day. So what about the 3 grams a day that they estimate that we can make de novo? It's based on some very detailed biochemistry, and I'm not going to take you down that rabbit hole in this video. The only thing I want to say about that aspect is that it's also built on both estimates and assumptions. And it strikes me that there is quite a lot of room for quite large error in any one of the components that make up that calculation. So I'm not saying that this is a bad paper, not at all, but I definitely would like to see a little bit more investigation done on glycine metabolism before I'm personally ready to accept that humans have got a shortfall of 10 grams of glycine per day. For one thing, another paper from the same period did actually attempt to measure how much glycine was synthesized and came up with a much higher figure than 3 grams. And importantly, they showed that glycine synthesis is heavily dependent on total protein intake. Hold that thought as well, because we'll come back to that. And just before I move on, another paper showed that humans who were subjected to a reduction of total protein intake were actually able to continue to make glycine. So all of this taken together makes me a little bit skeptical of the idea that the human diet needs to include skin and bones to maintain our own tendon health. I'm not saying that I don't believe it, it's just that I would like to see a little bit more data before I fully buy into the premise for needing collagen as a supplement. But there is another way to approach this issue. We might not be able to say with any confidence exactly how much glycine humans need to maintain strong tendons and ligaments, but if the supplementation actually improves the health of those tissues and it prevents injury or it increases performance, then we still know that the supplement is worth it. Well, actually, maybe we don't, and we'll come back to that as well, but it would still be a very useful thing to know. Several researchers have been trying to establish whether collagen supplements improve connective tissue, and I think it's fair to say the results on this are mixed. So the first study to make a big impact was this one, led by Keith Barr. 8 young men were given a gelatin supplement with either 0, the placebo, or 5 or 15 grams of gelatin. and then they took a short exercise protocol. And afterwards, the measures of their collagen synthesis were elevated in the blood after the higher 15-gram dose of gelatin. That sounds quite good for the gelatin supplement, but the problem is that the blood marker of collagen synthesis may just reflect bone synthesis. We don't know if the gelatin caused these men's actual tendons or ligaments to grow or to be more resistant to injury. And to get around that problem, the team took blood from the subjects after the supplementation, and then they fed it to engineered ligaments in the lab. That is, they harvest ligament tissue from humans, grow it in the lab into a sinew, and then they can test its properties once it's been bathed in the collagen supplemented serum from the real humans. So the headline finding was that the engineered ligaments fed the higher dose of gelatin did concentrate more collagen than the placebo. So far so good. But hang on a minute. Feeding the serum directly to ligaments is not really the way that things work in the body, and the authors actually note that in the paper. The amino acid concentrations in the fluid that surrounds ligaments and tendons in real bodies are likely to be a lot lower. So we can't just say from this data that collagen supplementation will improve real ligaments in real people. And of course, that hasn't stopped collagen manufacturers from making that claim, but that's another story. So this study and a couple of others were enough to launch a few lucrative collagen supplement brands. And personally, although I read these studies with interest at the time they were published, they weren't enough for me to walk out and buy a bag of powdered cow skin for £50. I still had 2 unanswered questions that remained before I would actually go and do that, and they are as follows. Keith Barr's initial study was a very useful proof of concept, which is that dietary glycine and proline can show up in blood and then can stimulate either bone or other collagen to grow. And since tissue growth often follows the appearance of nutrients in blood, that might not be all that surprising. But what's still unanswered is, if I actually take 15 grams of collagen over a longer time period, will it actually make my ligaments stronger? And will my injury risk go down compared to the glycine I ate in my normal diet? And so, speaking of my normal diet, the second question is, in Keith Barr's study, we don't know what else the young men were actually eating. As I was mentioning earlier, glycine production in the body is affected by the total protein intake. So are we seeing the supplement providing an independent benefit over and above the healthy diet? Or is it just actually making up for a shortfall of total protein? Some similar studies were done around this time, did measure protein intake in athletes given collagen supplements, and their protein intake tended to be a bit low. So now you can probably see where I'm starting to go with this video. So with those questions unanswered, I placed collagen firmly on the fence of supplements that I may consider, and I waited for studies to address those questions specifically. And finally now we do actually have a couple more really useful studies to get at this, and so we can start to home in on the question of whether or not you need a supplement. First, let's look at 2 positive studies on collagen supplementation. The first one was done in 2019, and it placed people who had Achilles tendinopathy on a calf strengthening protocol for 6 months. They were randomized to receive either a collagen supplement or a placebo, and they did 3 months on the collagen, and then they switched to the placebo or vice versa. And the results were that when they were on the collagen supplement, they did see an improvement in their pain scores. But unfortunately, the objective measures of tendon structure measured with ultrasound were not different between the collagen or placebo. So this study was very weak support for collagen supplementation, and in such a small study, you kind of worry that the subjective pain differences are in fact just an artifact, since their actual collagen supplemented tendons were not different from the placebo. But I actually have a bigger issue with the study. Again, the researchers didn't measure the total protein intake of the research subjects, and so if there is any effect here, is it just making up for a poor intake of protein? We just don't know. So this 2022 study was looking at the cross-sectional area of the patellar tendon in the knee. So 50 folk were randomized to either collagen or placebo, and then they were put through 14 weeks of resistance training. And those in the collagen group increased their patellar cross-sectional area more than the placebo. But again, they didn't measure the background diet, so we don't know how much total protein these people were eating, and I would like to know that. Also, in the recruitment stage of the study, they actually excluded anyone who already supplemented with protein. And I have a slight problem with that, because people who supplement with extra protein tend to be aware of its importance and tend to take care to eat more of it in their normal diet. So does that actually bias the inclusion criteria towards people who are eating less protein and therefore may benefit from a collagen supplement. But nevertheless, these last two studies have positive outcomes for collagen, and they have two things in common. One, they didn't measure the protein intake of their subjects, and the second thing they have in common is that they were both funded by Gelita, who is a collagen supplement manufacturer. I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I would like to see some independently funded studies, and there is one that's just come out. So in this one by Thomas Balshaw and colleagues, young active men were put through 15 weeks of resistance training while they were randomised to either collagen or placebo, and various measures of their patellar tendon remodeling were measured, including the cross-sectional area and the tendon stiffness, and there were no differences between any measure of tendon health between collagen or placebo. So there are actually a couple of other studies in the literature which I've not mentioned for the sake of time, but again, the results are kind of mixed and they don't point to a consistent positive effect, of the like that we would see with some really evidence-based supplements such as creatine. So in order to draw all this to a conclusion, I'm going to mention one more study. Throughout this video, I've been circling around the question, is any positive effect of collagen just making up for a shortfall of protein? And if we asked this same question as a research question, if we were to supplement a good standard protein like whey, would we see similar or better results than collagen? Better, as it turns out, at least by one measure. So 10 years ago, a Danish team of researchers looked at changes in patellar tendon cross-sectional area with 12 weeks of resistance training while they were randomised to a whey protein drink with extra leucine or a placebo. And with the training that both groups were put through, the placebo group increased their patellar tendon thickness by 8%, but the whey group increased by 15%. That's actually quite a decent difference, and it's larger than the effects that we've seen in the studies just discussed with collagen supplementation. So all of this research leads me to two hypotheses, and this part of the video is my own speculation, so just be clear on that. If you're failing to eat an optimal amount and quality of protein, as many people are these days, then taking a collagen supplement may well have a benefit in supporting your tendon health. There's absolutely no data on whether it will truly prevent injuries, but it's plausible enough that it could. However, given the current evidence that we have, I actually favour an alternative nutritional strategy, which brings me to the second hypothesis, which is an optimal amount and quality of protein should be sufficient to optimize collagen turnover, and eating skin and bones on top of this shouldn't be necessary. We definitely need more studies to directly compare a good diet with a proper amount and quality of protein to a good diet plus collagen, and we might actually even have them quite soon. I understand that they're in process, so I'll be looking at those with interest, and if they show a consistent positive result for collagen from independent research labs, then I might change my strategy in the future. But in the meantime, I don't supplement collagen, and instead I just make sure to eat about 150 grams of good quality protein every day. I think if you want to take collagen, then I have no reason to think that the collagen itself will do you any harm. It could do you harm indirectly though, and it has that in common with many other sports supplements. If you start to lean on them for your nutrition in order that you can keep the rest of your diet pretty poor, then you may be missing out on other nutrients that might influence your performance or your health far more. If you're eating high quality foods like red meat, eggs, dairy, vegetables and fruits, then they have a far stronger and broader evidence base for supporting health than any supplement. But if you know that you're just not going to eat those foods in sufficient quantity, then supplementation may be useful, may being the key word. I don't think you need to go out and buy a bag of collagen that costs $40 or $50 though. I think the standard gelatin that you get from your supermarket will be just as good, and a couple of studies actually show that. I think it would be criminal of me to end this video without talking about the other tried and tested big hitters with respect to preventing and treating tendon and ligament injuries. Optimizing nutrition is really important and I'm all for it, but it's more likely to be training that's going to move the needle on how robust your tendons are. So if you haven't started strength training, then start strength training yesterday and don't stop. Do your strength training in a consistent, progressive manner. Do it a few times a week and not less, and keep that up for years, basically forever. And that is what's going to give you strong and robust tendons. If you're doing that training and you feel like you're breaking yourself against it and it's making your fingers or your elbows hurt, then something about the training or your ability to recover from it needs to change. And that's what my book Make or Break is concerned with, is making sure you get those decisions correct. That is always going to be the most important factor. People are getting injured because their training progression is too fast, or it's too slow, or it's carried out with poor technique, or no awareness of form and safety. Alternatively, the problems are because their lifestyle is not compatible with absorbing training stress. There may be too much other stress in your life, or not enough sleep, or other things that give your body a bit of a kick in the teeth, like alcohol or smoking or environmental toxins and all those kind of things. All of these things associate with tendon injuries. You might think these things are unrelated, but they aren't. Earlier in the video, we talked about the glycine shortfall. One of the fates of glycine is to make glutathione, the body's master antioxidant, which you need to deal with oxidative stress and mounting an inflammatory response. So the point I want to get across is that even an effective supplement won't work as an alternative to a long and steady progression of training on the background of a good lifestyle that allows you to actually cope with that training. Okay, I'm going to make one more point before I go. The story of collagen as a supplement is really remarkable to me. It seems like a kind of exemplar of rebranding and how the processed food industry can really run rings around its customers. It reminds me of the expression making a silk purse out of a pig's ear, since collagen supplements are literally made of pig's ears. I see lots of comments in climbing social media about how terrible or even disgusting processed meat is. But processed meat, like sausages or chicken nuggets, came into existence in part to make use of the collagenous parts of the animal carcass that are left over when the fine cuts of muscle meat are removed. And people were literally protesting outside McDonald's to have them remove these parts from the burgers and the nuggets. And yet, that if you take that same carcass with all the skin and the bones and tendons and trotters and chop it up and degrade it with enzymes and chemically disinfect it and then powder it, package it in a bright plastic bag and then sell it back to you for £40 a kilo, then people will gladly add it to their food 3 times a day. I think food waste is terrible, and the fact that people are willing to actually eat the skin and bones of cows and not just the muscles is really good. I think it's a good thing, but still, it's kind of ironic. Okay, we'll see you in the next episode, and do let me know in the comments if there's other supplements that you are trying to justify. And until then, check your vitamin D status. That's a supplement that works.